Welcome everyone. This is the Philosopher's Poet. I have a guest of some renown, but I'll let her introduce herself.
I'm Heran. I am an Ethiopian adoptee that repatriated to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. I was raised in the Netherlands, but then went back, and it's been like 15 years since I'm back in the motherland, homeschooling my 3 children. And I
Yes.
do all sorts of things, but so this is kind of work also. This is a
Okay.
father of a young man who was adopted to the Netherlands. So his father is here, and then sometimes I translate. So I've done this work of like roots searches,
Okay.
connecting Ethiopian adoptees back to their birth families.
Mm.
But what I usually do is, yes, I'm a poet. I'm an African yoga teacher, Kemetic Yoga, ancient Egyptian yoga. Also, pregnant women, children, meditation master. So that's really, I guess, my
Mm.
heart. That's my
Yes.
my
Because going through sort of the bio you sent me, quite a lot of accomplishments. I was like, wow, there's a lot of hats, but I was fascinated by
uh,
the Kemetic yoga. You mentioned African yoga as well, which you also put in your profile. About
yeah.
Africa yoga, that's quite a broad statement. I was curious to know how that differs from Kemetic yoga, because obviously Africa could be a number of practices from the continent and different countries in the continent. So it was quite interesting.
So yes, when it comes to African yoga, I was trained under Pablo Imani. So that's Pimai African yoga, which means that this is the form that he developed after studying, Tai Chi, yoga, self-defense, all these other courses in Africa from different teachers. But then he kind of merged it all. So there are some movements from ancient Egypt, some movements that are typical for like fishermen. Fishermen might be pulling the net in, and so we do these kind of movements that are more around energy work.
Mm,
And it was really developed by himself. So part of it is just ancestral intelligence, right? Divine inspiration. And another part of it is really looking at the hieroglyphs and everything that we look at also in Kemetic yoga.
mm,
Um, so the difference for Kemetic yoga, I was trained under Yasser Rahotep,
okay.
and he's based in Chicago, but I did the course in Egypt.
Wow.
We toured from north to south, from Cairo to Luxor, and all these places in the south where we have the Nubian villages.
Yeah.
Uh, so that is, for me, is more like archaeology, because we
Yeah.
really look at the sculptures, the scriptures, the hieroglyphs, everything we find on the temple walls, and so everything is backed by evidence.
Mm,
Whereas I think with African yoga, it is an ongoing flow, and it is developed by African people for African people.
yeah.
Uh, Parts, rooted in history, and in other parts, really rooted in um, one's own understanding. So we focus a lot with African yoga on the natural elements. So
Mm,
the element of water may be flowy, um, the air that you might feel passing, when you move your fingertips, engaging with the air element. And then certain movements where we bow forwards to connect to the earth. So for that form, it's recommended to be outdoors, barefoot on the grass, to really connect to that element. And fire. So with the fire, we do a lot with the hips,
yeah.
because we hold a lot of also tension,
Mm,
trauma there, especially as women. So to liberate our bodies by making these movements, which are not sexual, but
mm,
they were sexualized in society when in African cultures that was just
yeah.
one of the dances. And so we incorporate a lot of dance in African yoga. That makes it quite different from like the more proper classical historic Kemetic yoga to like the more dynamic African yoga. And I guess for me, it depends on my students, whoever I teach,
Mm.
and whatever they need, I would be able to offer. Um, my background is more in classical hatha yoga, classical Indian yoga. That was my first introduction to yoga, but
Okay.
then I really wanted to dig for the roots of that as well. And then, you always come back to Africa.
Yeah, that is true. I think when people think of certainly philosophy and spirituality and scriptures, they think of two places or three actually. The first is usually if it's classical or Western training, it's usually Greece. Or it's either
Mm,
Sanskrit and India, and then obviously there's Egypt or ancient Egypt. And then people tend to forget that the Greeks sort of were influenced heavily by Egypt, and I'd wager to some extent so was the traditions of India, and then obviously further still, even though I guess Egypt was sort of this hub of, let's say, growth, that growth also permeated and included the rest of the continent. You know, like everywhere there were places of enlightenment. I'm going to say, not that everywhere else wasn't enlightened, but um, it's quite a complex story, um, and I don't think anyone, even those who study Kemet, fully understand the history of it. They understand, obviously, the history is not as been portrayed in modern media, certainly not. But there's a lot of mystery still. But I think sometimes you don't need the intellect to understand or at least intuitively know um, what it was all about in terms of all the higher vibrational aspects of the culture and the belief system. So I kind of see it as you started here, we kind of diverge because we learn through our mind, and then everything ends back up at this singularity where that knowledge we accumulate tends to match what we intuitively felt, kind of. So I don't, yeah,
confirmation of our own common sense and
yeah,
the information that's stored in our DNA.
mm,
Uh, yes, I mean, when we look back, really, it is the whole of Kemet,
mm,
the whole of the Nile Valley
yeah,
that where civilization started. And obviously, yes, it did extend into India and into parts of Arabia. And yes, we have more pyramids in Sudan than we have in Egypt.
mm,
So we could see that the heart is really deep in Africa. Um, Also looking at the Nile, it runs through like, I think 11 countries.
mm,
So it involves many ethnic groups and peoples. A lot of it has been forgotten, or like what we see in Egypt, um, because most people are strictly Muslim and different forms thereof. Everything is considered haram. That is
yeah, oh,
spirituality is considered haram.
yeah,
And so you do the same in African countries where um, yeah, it's no longer practiced as a physical or spiritual practice, but you could see some of these movements, they are integrated in the religious practice. So when when Muslim people pray, they go down on their knees, they bring their forehead down, they come back up, they do that several times. That's just like a sun salutation. We have the same in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, where after you've done your confessions, the priest will tell you like how many times you'll have to do this sequence. It's
yes,
called second. And yeah, so that's yeah, it's like I feel like it's still alive,
mm,
but in a different form. In a
yeah.
different form.
It's hidden in most. It's hidden in plain sight in most of the major religions, I think, because you mentioned about Islam was interesting. It's the same with Christianity. It's seen as heresy in a lot of
Right.
Christian countries, in the continent and outside the continent. But a lot of the practices and wisdom, a lot of the esoteric wisdom actually springs from those same places they consider heretical. So it's yeah. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it's the unbiblical horde of the world where not just humanity started, but also civilizations like high culture.
Mm.
And um, I'm happy that we can, we have preserved bits and pieces, in different places. So a lot of it can still be found in Egypt. Um, but it's hard to really resonate with it because that land is now actually, ruled by the Arabs. So it's like it's ruled by the invaders, which means that for us as Black people, we are not allowed to do any chanting near the pyramids. We are not allowed to do any yoga near the pyramids because they were really, really scared. They're like, haram, haram.
Okay.
Like,
Wow. Yeah.
don't
Wow.
want us to wake the ancestors. So, um, and other places where we also have pyramids, like in Sudan, it's not stable either, with the ongoing war.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
it's definitely our history that is interrupted,
Yeah.
right? But find remnants left and right, and then also tune in to connect to our own ancestral intelligence. Yeah.
Mm. So was that part of your journey, sort of this connection, remembering oneself? Not that you didn't know yourself, but I guess given because you obviously mentioned you grew up in the Netherlands and then you came back to um Ethiopia, was that part of you discovering your purpose, I guess? Because it very much feels like a story around almost like finding part of yourself. Not that you were incomplete, but I think everyone wants to understand, I guess, parts of themselves, their history, culture, and I guess above and beyond all things, the essence of themselves, which essence is a universal thing, but it's supported by culture because culture and the practices of your kin, your group of people, are often the easiest, the most direct way to access the divine or yourself. It's quite a
Exactly. No, I definitely search for, where I can relate. I think in my lifetime, I feel like my whole life has been a quest. So, being raised in the Netherlands, of course, I was in a white neighborhood, went to a white school, and then, as a teenager, I realized I have to like unlearn everything. Everything is different from an Afrocentric perspective. And in doing that, I think it took some years to really get back to, the roots of the roots,
yeah.
you know. And the same was with yoga, because I was practicing yoga with like elderly white women, and it was all right, but it didn't feel like that's where I needed to make the change. I
Mm.
really felt like I had to take it back home to my people, but
Okay.
also knowing how, like for example, in Amharic language, another word for the evil eye is Buddha. They call it Buddha.
Ah,
So there's a lot of confusion about what we don't know, and therefore I wanted to, bring back something that is done by us, for us,
mm.
by our own ancestors, and that's where Kemetic Yoga and African yoga for me was very important. um, it's interesting because now with the whole geopolitics, even people are very sensitive around Egypt. So Egyptian yoga by itself could be like invasive.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
um, like I don't know how, some people may not really relax with the idea of Egypt. That's from the Ethiopian perspective, yes.
Yeah.
And so I always adjust my classes regarding who is present. And
Okay.
for those that are ready for the deep Kemetic knowledge, I would take them through that. I would also use the local terms, the local like words.
Mm.
Um, so we have, for example, in India, you have the Sphinx pose,
Mm.
but in Kemetic yoga, it's called Hiru Amket. So it was Hiru with that having that single minded focus, which is what we need if we really want to envision our dreams, our mission, our purpose, a higher purpose in life. We need to have that focus, and also the strength of a lion. So it's a
Mm.
lion body and then, the
Mm.
head of a human, and when we go deeper into those stories around these poses, that makes it a lot more interesting, apart from just it being a physical workout,
Yeah.
apart from the fact that we are channeling energy and releasing blockages.
Mm.
We are actually tapping into a practice that was practiced by our people. And so I think as Black people, we should all be practicing Kemetic Yoga or some form of African yoga. But then also, it doesn't have to be limited to that. So whoever has affinity to it, I definitely welcome people to explore it, because it's a niche within yoga.
Yeah.
And very often we find that things are discovered or started in Africa, but then we don't really take the credit for it,
Yeah.
right? And then
Yeah.
appropriated in so many different ways.
Mm.
But I'm happy that the practice really was kept alive in India, right, for so many years, even when, religion and colonization destroyed a lot of our cultural practices in Africa. At
Mm.
least, yeah, bits and pieces were preserved there. And then with proper research, yeah, it's, a whole school of thought came out of it, or it was rediscovered with
Mm.
Kemetic. Yeah.
I mean, because I remember because for a while I was in the Christian religion. I haven't been for many years. But I do remember studying a lot of mystery religion and philosophy. And I remember reading the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, which is he was like the scribe of the Egyptian deity. So sort of, and when you read all these texts, you realize a lot of the sayings and wisdom is also replicated in newer religions like Christianity, certain sects of Christianity anyway. So you start to realize actually um, it's divine wisdom, but at the same time, even though wisdom can't be borrowed, ideas can be. It's just acknowledging and having a reverence for the source of that rather than
Exactly.
disregarding the yeah. So it's really interesting. Um, you actually made me laugh when you said practicing yoga with like middle-aged, I think you said white women. Not there's nothing wrong with that, but it made me laugh because you mentioned just the physical practice, and I think that's what's been distilled into the Western world. Um, I might get this wrong because I'm not a yoga expert, but I know there are several forms of yoga. There's those that deal with the physical, but then if you think in some spiritual thoughts, we have several bodies. And so there are other types of yoga that cater to the other bodies we have. And I think I know at least in the sort of traditions of India, there's the highest form of yoga is one that's appropriated towards a Brahma god. So, and obviously, I've never seen that in mainstream
Mm.
yoga, the idea of anything beyond the actual exercises themselves, because that's just the surface, I guess. And it sounds to me like a lot of
Yes,
what.
I mean, it's a way to get into our minds. So once we have worked on the body,
Mm.
released some tension, some stress, some pain, allowing all the energy to flow properly to open up the joints, lengthen the muscles, then we can sit for meditation. So that's the whole purpose of yoga, actually. So we can sit better. And we sit for meditation in order to be able to meditate, to like purify our mind, in order to quiet our mind, to really look at things objectively. And but apart from that, of course, there is the giving of service,
Mm.
and you could have a yogic lifestyle, which also means being aware of what you eat and how you eat it, and the internal narratives that we have when we talk to ourselves, like all of that are levels of awareness that you can work towards as you're evolving as a yogi. The spiritual or the physical movement is really in order to maintain our temple, and it's the way in and to go beyond the ego, because this, loud voice, chattering voice, it often keeps us on a surface level, and we won't be able to really connect even with the subconscious mind. But through the breath, which I think is see, when we speak of yoga, the breath, and through observing the breath and observing the sensations that we have in the body, whether you're making a movement or not, it doesn't even really matter what you are doing, but being aware of the breath will mean that whatever comes up, either as a trigger, or as pleasure, whatever sensation comes up, it causes for us to react.
Mm.
But there are times where we don't have to react, we could just observe. And so to make better decisions, we want to make that moment of awareness between every breath just a little bit longer, a little bit wider, a little bit more spectrum and inner vision, in order to like separate the ego and the idea of who we are, right? So when I introduce myself, that is the idea of how I see myself or how people see me. But in essence, we are that awareness that beyond it all is just observing everything that's happening. And it doesn't have a name and it doesn't have a body. You know,
Mm.
it's that energy.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't think I've heard many people describe it as clearly as you. I would say that that was quite amazing. I would say I really enjoyed listening to you describe that. Um, um, I suppose so. It was, I guess, partly a journey of for you of self-identity, but I'd like to know more about like, because obviously it sounds like service is as a massive thing to you, like a life purpose. Um, I think you even say in your bio that you recognize from a young age that your purpose was to serve or to help heal. Um, what sort of driving force behind that? Because obviously sometimes it's not what we choose to do, it's the why. The sort as the source.
right. Yes. No, I think for me, I remember always feeling that way as a child. Like, first of all, wanting to help, second of all, wanting to heal. But it was only like in my late 30s that I really recognized that, okay, I am a healer. And that's why I've always felt that way. And that's why yoga is such a wonderful channel for me, because anybody who's willing could I could take them through that journey. And
Mm,
in that journey where we release physically and we go deeper inside, my aim is to bring you back to your natural state where you are peace, where you are love, like almost levitating or having that sensation as if you are in another realm, in another dimension, or just having the experience of having more space, headspace. Um, so being able to share that brings me a huge amount of joy. I think when I was younger, I didn't really know how um, that would lead into my purpose. So I went to university for forestry, tropical forestry, because I felt like I need to save nature. You
mm,
know, like in my efforts to help. Um, I thought really planting trees is the main thing that my country needs. You know, always when we hear about Ethiopia, we hear about drought, we hear about famine, we hear about war, and then it's recurring.
mm,
And so really, so consistently following my heart has led me on this path from like being a forester to becoming a mommy and teaching yoga and writing my poetry. Like all of that has been an organic flow of just staying true to myself and allowing myself to, you know, like a car has a steering wheel, so to change direction if I want to. Because of that, I've also tried a lot of different things. Um, because I think also as a creative person, there are so many things you could be doing. So I'd love to get more into music,
mm.
and I'd love to learn more about photography and film, and I'd love to write more. And like all of that is in the creative sphere, and it doesn't have to be limited to one. Um, but yes, this purpose, this feeling, this quest, and discovering that I'm a healer, that it has improved my life. So instead of looking for people that
Mm,
need healing and then attracting those kind of people into my personal space, so I would have these projects or passion projects where, we
mm,
focus on changing somebody's life. But I realized that's not what a healer does. Like, it's actually about, I don't know, just sharing some pointers and for people to discover their own path of healing for themselves, and just living that life myself as an example. Um, so my children, they meditate
okay.
every morning, every evening for 10 minutes. They know I meditate for an hour in the morning, an hour in the evening. It's less, but just seeing their mommy do it, I think is part of just passing on the tools. I don't feel like it has to be like instructions as a
Mm,
healer, like you have to do this and this and this, eat this and this and this. Um, but really, I guess when people come to my class, I try to meet them wherever they are in their journey. So
yeah.
when they are pregnant, I encourage women to be gentle to themselves. Because even when we're pregnant, like, women are very hard on ourselves. We're very critical. And so, yeah, positive affirmations, meditation, yoga, but also like taking people into nature, like all of that. It is all with the same purpose, the idea behind of taking people back to their true selves, their true natural selves. And with that, I have to say, like, I'm a big hugger.
Okay.
Um,
And
we can do so much by just giving someone like a 30 seconds or a hug for a minute. It can actually, transform lives.
yeah.
So
Okay. Well, do you want to try a virtual hug? No, I can't do that. Lunch. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. There we go. Thank you. Yeah. So, okay. Um, I guess before we wrap up the conversation, I just wanted to hear a bit more about your writing because I'd love to hear some of your writing if you had any or anything you wanted to speak on that really is poignant for you, something that sort of speaks to you. I mean, all our as writers or poets or whatever form of writing you do, everything we write speaks to us, but there's always something, there's a particular like kind of there's a nexus of emotion and motion with a few particular pieces.
right. Yes, what I could do is I could read something from the book that we published, an anthology of Ethiopian adoptees. There is a poem in there which is about home,
Okay.
and uh, so
Okay.
that I could see as uh, a possibility to share. So I could go and get the book.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, so this is yeah, it's been a couple of years ago. It came out like 2 years ago, but the
Okay.
process of co-writing took a long time. Um, so what I have in here is like both poetry and stories. But yeah, let me just read this one poet about home. Ethiopia. Ethiopia has so much to share. Spiritual energy everywhere. Social cohesion where people still care. At home with my soulmates, at peace with my fate, constant change, life is great. With 13 months of sunshine, we backspace and rewind in time. Beautiful people, nature sublime, yet at the same time, structural discrepancy, infrastructural deficiency, theatrical democracy. We have no privacy but community. All this unpredictability demands flexibility, patience, and determination. This accumulation opened my eyes to the reality, the synergy, the frequency. Connecting to the creator is what truly sets me free. Incense, herbs, and spices, fragrances of the coffee ceremony, awaken my early childhood memories, pleasing my senses to the highest degree. I'm more aware with a slower pace, out of chronological time and geological space. In the realm of my ancestors, I am welcomed with grace. Home is true family, not necessarily blood, but spiritual unity, the never-ending journey, accepting me for me, exploring identity in the cradle of humanity. Home is where my soul finds healing and my being becomes whole, living my dream and witnessing the unseen. Sorry there.
That's all right.
Dance through life, synchronize the rhythm, seek and find home within.
Okay, lovely. I'm glad actually. I'm not glad you cop. I'm glad you repeated that bit because that was sort of the key there in terms of how you sort of meet the joys and the sort of inner truths and the inner peace with all the conflict around you. Yet there's still great love, great things that can be seen if you've got eyes to see them, and yeah, so some warmth to it. Yeah, I like that.
But this is quite old. This is like maybe I wrote this like almost 10 years ago. But
I
yeah,
guess,
yeah.
yeah. The thing is, feelings are feelings and emotions and wisdom, they're timeless. So it doesn't mean, whether it's 1 year, 10 year, 100 years, So no, I appreciate that. Okay. All right. So we got about a minute and a half left. So what I'd love you to do is just give your social media details out. Um, on-
Sure, yes. So you can find me on Instagram, Heran's Yoga or Heran's Poetry. Also on Facebook, Heran's Yoga. What else? What else? Yes. WhatsApp, email. I can share it. Heran Hero at gmail.com. But I think the hashtags are the main ones. So
okay.
Heran's Yoga, Heran's Poetry.
Okay. Well, I'll put them in the link when I upload the clips as well. So yeah, and obviously when I send you a copy of the video. But it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you too.